So in the final video in this module, I want to look at a very different way of sequencing MIDI data in the DAW. It's sometimes called loop-based sequencing or pattern sequencing. So I want to show you how it works. And then I want to connect that to a particular kind of sound module called sampler and talk about how they work and combine these together to create a drum sequencer. And we'll look at how we can also automate changes in our pattern sequencer over time to really build an entire drum track for a piece of music this way. So like I said at the end of the last video, pattern sequencing is good for a lot of different applications. One of the reasons you might turn to it is if you're not comfortable recording MIDI by using a MIDI controller like a keyboard or whatever else might be available to you. Pattern sequencing represents MIDI data in a fairly simple and very visual way. You can see that this looks a little bit like the piano roll view, but it's different. It's a grid, and so our x-axis is still time here, and it's split up into 16th notes. So the red columns here represent every beat. So we have 4 beats here. So that equals 1 measure in 4/4 time, and then each of these boxes is 1/16th note because each beat has 4 16th notes to it. And then our y-axis here is MIDI note number. So this is going from low here. This might be MIDI note number 60 and 61 and 62 and so on and so forth on up. And then what you do is you click on each of these boxes. So like this box is enabled, which means that on the second 16th note of this pattern, MIDI note number 63 will play, and so on and so forth. And so by clicking these on, excuse me, by clicking these on, you can create a pattern which will then loop over and over and over again. So this represents 1 measure of music that just repeats over and over and over again in your DAW. So I want to show you how this works in practice. We'll go into Reaper, which has a fairly simple but pretty good pattern sequencer in it. So we'll go ahead and create a track in Reaper just like we've done before. I will do all the things I did. I'll arm it for recording. I actually don't really need to configure the input here because I'm not playing anything live, but I'll do that just because I'm in the habit. So my input will be all MIDI inputs, all channels. I'll turn on the monitoring as well. And then I'll go and I'll pick a virtual synthesizer here. We'll pick resynth just like we've been doing all along. And then I'm going to add another plugin. This is actually a MIDI effect here. It's under JS, and it is called Sequencer Baby, I believe. Let's find it on the list here. If I type in sequencer, it should make it a lot easier to find. There we go. MIDI Sequencer Baby. So I put that in, and I get that same interface you saw on the slide. And I can click on different notes. We can set what the lowest note is here. Right now it's set for 60, middle C. So I can hit that and kind of just click things to build a melody this way with a few kind of offbeats there or something like that. And then it will start playing as soon as I hit play here. I have to do one thing first, of course, which is to respect the order of effects in the chain, because this is essentially a MIDI effect. It's not taking any input from my track, but it's sending MIDI output. So it needs to come before my virtual instrument. So the sequencer comes first, and then any MIDI effects I might have, then my virtual instrument, and then any audio effects I might have. So now if I go ahead and play this, I get my melody. And I can actually edit this as this is playing back. And if there's a note I don't like, then I just click it again and it turns it off. And so on and so forth. So that's the basics of how this works. What I want to do now is combine this pattern sequencer that we have with a sampler in order to create a drum machine. Samplers do lots more than just make drum machines. So let me talk for a second in general about how they work. They're sound modules or responders that respond to MIDI messages. Instead of synthesizing sound from scratch, they're playing back digital audio files. And typically the way this works is that you map different MIDI note numbers to trigger the playback of different audio files. So MIDI note number 60 let's say that I'm trying to recreate a piano, for instance. I might record all 88 keys on the piano, one by one. And then when I hit MIDI, when I send my sampler a MIDI note number 60, I would then play back the recording of me pressing middle C on the piano. When I play back 61, and when I send MIDI message 61, I do it for MIDI note number 61, and on. Often what happens with samplers is you won't record every single individual pitch. You wouldn't include all 88 notes on the keyboard. You'd include maybe every third or fourth or fifth note, and then you would change the playback speed automatically of those different sound files, so that they would change their pitch as well and match those different notes. So when I played back C, maybe I do have a recording of MIDI note number 60. So it would play back the original file. If I send MIDI message 61, it might just play it back ever so slightly faster so that it sounds like a C sharp instead of a C, and so on and so forth. The way we're going to use samplers is actually even simpler than that. We're not going to transpose these files or change their playback speeds at all, because they're just drum sounds. We're just going to map different MIDI note numbers to different drum sounds. So I'm going to go ahead and delete resynth here, and I'm going to add instead the sampler that ships with Reaper. Go to my instruments section here, clear my filter, so it'll actually show me everything that's there, and do a Resamplematic 5000. It's a funny name, but it's a very simple sampler. And what I want to do is don't shift these semitones, don't do that transposition. I'm going to just play back the original file. So my mode is called sample mode. And I'll set this up to just respond to my middle C, to MIDI note number 60. So it starts responding at 60, and it finishes responding at 60. And then I need to tell it what sample I want it to include. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the Actions menu in Reaper and open that EarSketch Sounds folder where we have all those sounds. I'm going to go to a folder we haven't really used yet called Make Beat. And this one just has a bunch of different drum samples in it. So I can drag in this clap wave file, just drag it on there, and I'll get that immediately. And I can hear that play back. So now when I hit a middle C, I get that clap to play back. When I hit any other note, C sharp or D or whatever else, nothing happens, because the sampler is only configured to respond on MIDI note number 60 right now. But what I can do is I can copy, I can paste that a bunch of times here. I'll do maybe 5 of them, and have each of them set up to respond with a different sound file and on a different MIDI note number. So here I can do maybe a closed hi-hat and have that respond on MIDI note number 61. And then I can go to the next one here, and I can have that be cowbell. And I can have that respond on MIDI note number 62. And then have my next one be a kick, and have that be MIDI note number 63. And then my last one here, I'll have be a snare drum, and I'll have that be on 64. And I could go on and on and do more of these. I won't in the interest of time here. But now I have C, C sharp, D, D sharp, and E, my different numbers. So I was just doing those by playing the notes on the keyboard, and you can certainly use a sampler that way and record your drum tracks in this case by just playing the notes and recording them in the same way we recorded MIDI in an earlier video in this module. But what I want to do here is actually hook it up to this pattern sequencer and build out my drum beats this way. So I only put in 5 sounds, so it's going to be the bottom 5 rungs here. So like these won't sound here. I'll just go ahead and turn those off for now. But if I start playing this, you'll hear instead of that resynth playing back, we're going to hear it on the sampler. And I can click on different things. So I build a simple pattern that way. And that will loop as long as my project is playing back. One more thing that we need to look at to really make this into a usable drum sequencer. So we've been able to, through a sampler, we've been able to map this to different, map different MIDI notes to different drum sounds that are playing back as audio files. But what we also really need to do is be able to change the drum beat at different points in the song, because Because most songs, at least that I know, don't have the same one measure drum beat repeating over and over and over again for the entire song. They have fills, they have breaks, they have different patterns that might happen in different spots. And luckily, we have a way to do that through envelopes. So I want to show you how that works really quickly. You can see here is there are 16 different patterns available to us, 0 through 15. We're on pattern 0 right now. If I go to pattern 1, I can do something else. I'm just going to do something really kind of simple and silly here. We'll play that back and see how that sounds. So now I can switch to pattern 0 or pattern 1. I could go ahead and make 15 of these that way if I wanted to. I'm sorry, 16 of them, 0 through 15. But once I have those, since this is a user interface element in my sequencer, which is part of my effects chain, I can automate it the same way I'd automate anything else. So I click on my envelopes, and I go here and click on pattern. And now I have a lane to control that here. And so I can add a new point, say at the beginning of measure 3. And I can go ahead and double click on that if I want to be able to edit that precisely. I'm sorry, I control click on it, say set point value, and it can set the value. 7.5 doesn't make any sense. What I want is number 1 to be in there. So I hit 1, and there we go. We switched from pattern 0 to pattern 1. And you know, at some point when I was dragging this, my first value went from 0 up to 1. So I'll drag that back down to 0, and we should see this change. And if I open up that user interface with the sequencer, you'll actually see it change visually as well. So this way, I can make a number of different one-measure drum patterns, and then I can automate where they're coming in over the course of the piece. And if I want the drums to lay out at a certain point, I just set it to a blank pattern, and then they'll be silent, and I'll be set. So that's the basics of how to do pattern sequencing, in this case for drum sequencing, but it can be used in a lot of other applications as well. So we've covered a lot over the course of Module 3 about MIDI. So I just want to take a second to review all of that. We talked about MIDI, what it is, types of MIDI devices. We delved into some details of the MIDI specification. We looked at how to record and edit MIDI data in the DAW, and some of the ways that we could edit it that are different than how we edit audio data. We looked at effects and automation with MIDI, and again, how there are some things that become available to us that are different from what's available with audio, but also how we can carry over some of the same ideas. And then finally, we looked in this video at pattern sequencing with MIDI. Moving into Module 4, we're going to take a bit of a turn in the course here, and we're going to start to write our own software. We're going to write some very simple programs in the Python programming language that will actually help us do things like creating our own effects or writing our own algorithms to compose music, so that we can learn a little bit more about how these kinds of things work under the hood, and we can also learn about some new and kind of expressive and creative ways to make our own music, and move towards the realm of designing music technology software and creating new kinds of experiences with technology and music. If you've never coded before, it's not something that you need to be at all concerned about. We're going to start from the very basics, but we'll move quickly and get to some very interesting things very quickly. So I'm looking forward to exploring that with you starting in Module 4.